Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth and it's nice to be with you here today. Today I'm sharing about the easiest, simplest way to make a quilt with 2 pieces of fabric and some batting, and it's a great way to practice your machine quilting skills. My friend was unable to finish these quilts for her great-grandchildren, and so I will be finishing them up with some simple quilting stitches and showing you how to do it. First thing I do is I make my quilt sandwich with some 505 spray. That is my preferred way of getting the layers to stay together. You could also use some large safety pins. And typically the quilt top is smaller than the batting and backing because things do shift, but my friend who put these together cut these all the same size. So there might be some shifting, and I will most likely trim away just the edge of these quilts that I'll be putting together so that the edges are straight and I can put that binding on. After spraying both the front and the back and smoothing the fabric over the batting, I took my large ruler. It has a 45-degree line on it, and I'm going to be laying that 45-degree line on the edge of my quilt so I can get a diagonal line through my quilt, and I'll be marking my quilt with painter's tape. I put the tape through the middle of my quilt. That's where I'm going to begin adding stitches. I'm going to roll up the corner of the quilt so that I can fit it through my machine. I gave myself a little bit bigger stitch on my sewing machine, and I'm using the all-purpose foot. I know some machines do better if you're using a walking foot when you are doing straight line quilting, but it seems to work fine with my machine and the all-purpose foot. And also I think I can go just a little bit faster doing it this way, and I'm just following along that tape, going through the center of my quilt and checking to make sure that my backing is smooth and I don't have any puckers. Getting that first line in, I took the tape off and I measured 3 inches. I put the 3-inch line right on my seam, and then I used the same pieces of tape. Typically, if I'm making a baby quilt like this, I can usually reuse that tape over and over again and get through the quilt. Sometimes the tape will give out, won't be sticky anymore, and I'll just get another piece, but this is my frugal way of using my tape and getting the job done. Here's the binding I'll be using on my quilt. It's cut 2.5 inches wide, and I cut it the width of the fabric, and I'll put a seam from corner to corner and cut away that excess triangle. I'm going to press my binding in half, and I'll be adding it to the back of my quilt. Here's the back of the quilt, and I wanted to mention this is a flannel backing, makes it really soft. I'll lay that binding on the side of my quilt, and I'm going to leave a tail about 10 inches long before I start sewing that seam. Before I get to the corner, I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch away and pivot and sew off the corner of my quilt. Then I'll turn the quilt and pull that binding up and down, putting a fold there at the corner, and I'm going to start sewing right on top of that fold, and I'll do that all the way around. After I went around the quilt, I stopped before getting to the end there, and I'm going to fold both tails of binding and cut on one of those folds. I'm going to put the folds together, cut on one, and then the other one I will be measuring from the fold and making the tail just 2.5 inches long, and I'm using that little leftover piece of binding. That's 2.5 inches, so I can easily measure. And now I'll put right sides together just like I did when I was joining my binding. I need to kind of bunch up the quilt a little bit so I have room to work, and I'll be adding a seam just like I did when I joined my binding, and then checking to be sure that it fits before I trim away the excess triangles. My binding did fit, so I will pin here, and then I'm going to finish sewing that binding on the back of my quilt. Turned my quilt over, and I'm just wrapping that binding to the front of the quilt, and I'll be top stitching all the way around. Here's the second of the 2 quilts that I'm finishing for my friend. I'm making my quilt sandwich here, and this time I'm going to use some all over quilting lines, some free motion quilting on this quilt here, and I do have a video, at least one video, of how to do these free motion quilting lines, and I'll leave a link below. This time I'm doing a loop-de-loop, and I'm beginning in the center of the quilt and kind of working around and moving out to the edges. I'm going to switch my all-purpose foot for a free motion quilting foot, and I'll be putting the feed dogs down and working around this quilt. Here are those loop-de-loop lines. You can see them on the back of the quilt, and I did need to stop every now and again and double check that everything was smooth on the back. This is a great way to practice your machine quilting. If you've pieced a quilt top and you're worried about machine quilting, you didn't want to ruin all that hard work you put into that quilt, this is a great way. Just use 2 pieces of fabric and batting and do some practice on quilting a quilt. These turned out really nice, and I'm happy to be able to help my friend out by quilting these cute baby quilts. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.